Oh, I don't see anything. That's very strange. Oh, now it's doing something. Here we go. Maybe. Mm.
I think we're
Oh,
live.
I think we're live too. Welcome. My name is Jason Tamborini. I'm the artistic director with Prologue Theater. Thank you for joining us tonight for our second installment of our behind the scenes look into workshops with our Forward a New Work series. I'm here tonight with Jenna Duncan, associate artistic director and casting director for Only Theater. So welcome, Jenna. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Jason.
Happy day, really. We were just chatting a little bit ahead of time, but figure we could start off just with you giving a little bit of an introduction about yourself and some of your experiences with workshops, and we could kind of go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in the DC area professionally since 2013, and have been I started with a mix of freelancing and I was also associate producer at Forum Theater, so I was doing some production management type things. I stage managed for a few people. I bounced around. Ultimately, I got enough freelance work that I sort of was able to make casting my main thing, casting and directing my main thing. And then moved to Imagination Stage, was their interim artistic associate for a while. And eventually ended up coming back 3 years ago to Only full-time as their casting director. So, but I've cast for a lot of places in DC, which is to say I've also cast a lot of workshops for a lot of different theaters in DC. So right now, primarily, my most recent ones are Only has a workshop program that we launched a couple years ago, maybe even last year, called the Vanguard Arts Workshops. So we do about 3 of those a year. We obviously are not doing them right now. Actually, that's not true. We have done a virtual one now. I'm so used to saying we're clearly not doing anything because it's 2020. And then I've done a myriad of like readings of new works that are called workshops but are really a day. And then I've done readings of new works that are fully development workshops that last 2 weeks and sort of everything between there. And then some at Theater J, a couple at the Kennedy Center, that sort of thing. So yeah, have bounced around both as director and casting director in workshop capacity.
Awesome. Well, it's okay. So tonight I kind of wanted to focus mostly on the casting side of things and talk about your expertise and experience in there. So for people who are unfamiliar with this idea, with the idea of like casting specifically when it comes to a workshop, how does casting a workshop work? Is it different than casting a full production? What kind of specifically things go into that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, honestly, it's sort of a case-by-case basis, but I'll tell you a bit about how things could change between production and workshop. And the caveat to give is this is my regional theater experience, right? So this is not how Broadway commercial workshops necessarily work, right? This is how this works in DC regional theater and in similar markets. But so the changes are really like, I like to say that I can often either with a workshop think bigger or think smaller in terms of, and the difference is that if the workshop is like a one-day, one-off workshop of something that isn't going to keep going necessarily, the thing that we run into often is that it's hard to audition for that, both because you don't want actors to have to audition for something they're not actually making a lot of money doing, but also because there's just sometimes not enough time prior, or people are from out of town, that sort of thing. So sometimes I run into needing to work with people that the directors and playwrights know, which just makes the pool smaller. And often that's also because of the relationship developed and how they want that person's collaboration and feedback in the workshop environment, which I can get to a bit later when we talk about like actors for workshops and what people are looking for. But then sometimes if it's a workshop that is going to have a couple of steps to it, it's a little more flexible, and sometimes I can suggest people for roles that maybe wouldn't be like the safe choice for whatever that would mean for a main production, but that we can test some different types and some different, right, like there's some things that can be a little more fun on the casting front sometimes if you know that it's not the be all end all of the show.
Yeah. You brought up a question, something that I have a question about, and we may actually just end up talking about it as we get further into the specific actor things, but just that idea of, I've talked about it with a couple of different people, just that idea that like for a workshop, actors need to have almost a whole different set of skills for it.
Yeah.
It's not the same style of rehearsal. Things happen much faster, and a lot of the time you don't get the chance to really like grow into a role. You just have to make big choices real fast and have it be super snappy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about just thinking quickly on your feet in a different way sometimes. You're so right. It's not the same amount of processing time a lot of the time.
I can tell you right now, I would be a terrible actor in a workshop because I need lots of processing time. I would be a terrible actor in general. Let's be honest. I shouldn't do that. But no, that idea that you kind of started to talk about it, that the actors' skill, not their skill level or their skills in particular, just like I don't even know where my brain was going with that. See, this is an example of me being a bad person to think on their feet instantly.
We're giving you processing time.
Yeah, exactly. I need the processing time. And to take that time, I'm going to move on to the next question because I'll remember it. When casting a workshop, aside from the time constraints, are there any other kind of special considerations that come into play on a regular basis?
Yeah, I mean, so actually I'm going to tie this into what I think you started to ask before, potentially, which is just that I think some of the special considerations come down to what you're really exploring in that particular workshop of that play, right? So that might change depending on which phase the play is in when. So, that can mean that like these are just examples that I've used lately. Like that could mean that you're doing a play that went through a few workshops where it was really, you were focused on like the story and you wanted people that really were outspoken and were going to challenge that playwright in the room. And sometimes that means people that they already have a relationship with. And then maybe the play is a little bit more finished and you're playing with some different ages of casting. So then it comes into play like, okay, maybe we want somebody like Megan Graves who plays a really large range of roles. For those of you who don't know her, how could you not know her? She's perfect. Anyway, there's a large range from like, okay, we could cast this role as a little kid and we can sort of see that in her. We could also cast this role as a 30-year-old and sort of see that, right? So then sometimes the casting becomes like, how flexible is the range of that particular actor for us to play around with in a workshop? But then it can also be like, we're really experimenting with this, so actually recently at Only, we did something where we had a character that we were experimenting with if they were only going to be dancing or if they had if they were only movement or if they had some text or what the balance was. So we really needed somebody who had both and could really bring some movement experience as an example. And sometimes that's also true in, I'm thinking of like when we were workshopping the adaptation of the Velveteen Rabbit that I did at Adventure, and people like Noah were really key to developing the movement vocabulary for the show in those workshops because they have so much movement background and it's so natural for them. So I think those are some examples of things that people might look for in a workshop that like you might know already in a full casting process.
Yeah, and I think I really appreciate you bringing up that idea that like different plays, especially new works, obviously, they're being workshopped, are in different places, and they can hit a workshop several times, and each workshop is a different focus. For the most part, all of our forward workshop pieces, the focus is really on the story. It's on finding and honing that the craft in that story there. And so it's just a vastly different thing if we were looking at this and going, okay, great, this is our last big push before we want to go to a full production. So now it becomes nitpicky, like on these things, or like that, just that super detail oriented thing, or we're going to focus on how we can play with the characters and what changing some of that stuff deals with. And so I'm really glad you brought up the differences in just types of workshops.
Yeah. But I do think that honestly, it's interesting. I said all that, but I think actually in my experience of trying to cast the right workshop for any director, the mix of people is really key, right? Like the mixture of different skills that can make you a good team. Actually, I think is extra. I mean, it's always key in theater, but it's extra key when you're birthing something, right? Like,
oh yeah,
for lack of a better term.
So we're talking a lot about the performers, the actors themselves. I kind of want to jump a question just because I want to ask, because now we've been really heavily focused here. What is the appeal for an actor? Why do they want to do workshops? As you mentioned, they don't usually pay super well. They are sometimes super quick fire, go for a day or two, and sometimes it's a 2-week drawn out process that can be incredibly frustrating if things aren't working in the right direction, depending on all of the different minds that are coming into that room. And on a playwright side of things, I can imagine for them, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm getting to hear this, I'm getting to see this. So even if it's a trying process, I want this to happen. But why do actors want to jump in on these?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not an actor, so hopefully I'm answering. I will say what I have always heard from actors, and who knows? But they, from what I have experienced, it's been, well, there's a couple of logistical things, which is sometimes if it's a workshop that's like pre-production, there can be clauses that we will have to offer the same person from the workshop, depending on what the equity relationship is, which I know is too much to get into here. But so sometimes there are reasons to do it so that you continue to work with the same project. Sometimes I think it's sort of less pressure, honestly, than doing a full show. We all, sometimes I use workshops as like, or I'll use that term and telling everybody like, it's treated like a workshop. Like we're doing this run of the show, but like we're still figuring enough things out. And I think what I always mean by that is that there's a little bit of like, we're not doing this for polish yet, right? We're still experimenting. Yeah. And that's really the fun part, I think, for a lot of actors, is the experimenting and the collaborating in the room. And so I think that's sort of part of it, is getting to play for that amount of time in a way that maybe you would have more of a deadline and more pressure in a production.
Yeah, I like some of the language you're using there, that idea of like, it's a workshop is about play. It's about just finding different things and seeing where things can go, not necessarily how you can do something, but where you can go with it. Whereas as you get closer and closer to a full production, if it's a final workshop where you're going into production, or if it's the last couple of weeks of a rehearsal process for a production, it's about like, not necessarily, I don't want to use the term settling because that sounds so negative, but like you're settling into these characters' lives, you're settling into this story, and
often you're blocking in choices for the safety and comfort of your other actors, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's also, I mean, that obviously that's always a part of workshops as well. But yeah, I mean, when things aren't locked in yet, I mean, I like to think of it as like, So a lot of my brain runs on the sort of production management side. So like from it's like a concept meeting for actors, right? Like you're dreaming big, you're thinking outside of the box, you're not you have leeway to like make huge choices and go there and then learn that maybe that's not entirely correct. But you have
But
time
you
at
can
the
still,
next
yeah,
meeting to figure it out and draw
yeah,
that.
you can still go there. I do love concept meetings. I love when people like somebody hands me a script and says, "Just tell me what you're imagining," and I will, "Oh, here we go."
But that's also the kind of thing, like, I feel like there's acting equivalent, right, to what I think what directors and designers do, right? When they're like, so imagine the whole thing takes place on one giant knife. And like, I mean, that's insane, right? But whatever the, maybe not, but whatever the actor equivalent to that of being like, I'm gonna make this person as ambitious and cutthroat and whatever as I possibly can for this one read, and then find all the nuances in why that personality became what it was or whatever. So
To me, it's the idea of like you walk into a room and you say, "Okay, so I have this idea. The whole stage is a revolve," and everyone in the room's like, "Okay, cool," and then you go, "But not like a normal revolve. This one's a hamster wheel," and everyone then they go, "Oh no,
they're like,
where did we go?"
And then, sorry, I know I'm talking too much. And the last thing,
No, you're good. You're good.
as we joked about, the last thing about this is just to say, in terms of the appeal for actors, I don't know if this is the appeal for actors. I will say the appeal from my perspective of asking actors to do this and working with actors in workshops is that I also think it's a place where we get to, well, okay, let me back up. So the like frankly very patriarchal way that directors and actors have worked together throughout history, and the sort of like using actors as pawns that has been in movies and in his, you know, more in theater as we once knew it, that I hope we're sort of moving out of, both for white supremacist practice reasons and patriarchal reasons and all of these things that make this not helpful anymore. But I think in workshop land, we've already moved a little further than that, right? Like, I think actors are not actually being moved around the stage by a director in the way that like perhaps they were by an old white man directing a Shakespeare however many years ago, right? But that you're actually able to collaborate in a way that maybe not everybody has moved to a place in the room where they're executing that behavior. And I know that's sort of a negative take on it, but I think we're moving faster in some of these progressive ways.
Yeah, but I do think that also, I do agree. I do hope that when we come back into this, it is much further away from those old practices. But I also think it's a very viable hope. I think it's quite easily something that's happening because it was happening before.
Yeah, but I feel like for the workshops I've worked in, like the sort of play atmosphere has gotten rid of a lot of that for longer, right? Like I feel like that's when you're like, I hope we come back to that. I hope we come back to that in full production.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like it's a very different environment and sort of allows for more of that to succeed.
Cool. I know that this is not really the topic we're talking about, but it doesn't matter. Who cares? It's our conversation. Do you think, to kind of keep going on that, do you think that all of this virtual theater production and these virtual readings and play workshops and things that have had more time and in a different art form, I guess, to really call it what it is, but also a different medium, do you think that will help this idea along?
I don't know that I know the answer to that. I mean, I think, you know, sort of, this is sort of a workaround because I don't know the answer to your question. I wish I did. But like, I think what that makes me think of is like, I hope that any of the lessons that do work from the virtual stuff, we can pull forward, right? Like if there is, if it does feel like we achieve a level of like equity of schedule or whatever it might be, or family care or whatever that might be that people can do virtually that they can't always commit to in person. I think if that levels the playing field for any actor to participate, then that's awesome, right? Or ability or whatever it might be, right? That like if you can do it from home, maybe that's helpful. And if we're more flexible about that moving forward, then maybe that, to answer your question, brings us a little bit closer to success in some of these realms. But I also think it's really hard. And I know I've also had a lot of actors say they don't like it, right? Because you're not face to face with people. So I'm never sure who's going to be excited and not about this medium.
Yeah. I think one of the things that it will help with specifically is just rehearsal hours and scheduling of things. I mean, because we're all used to, have had those 10-hour rehearsals or those 8-hour rehearsals. You try doing 8 hours on Zoom, anybody, I dare you. The only people I can think of that are even really doing it often is teachers right now. And I can only imagine what that's really like for them. So I don't think we're going to end up having, when we come back in person, I don't think anyone will be prepared to have 8 and 10-hour rehearsals anymore.
Yeah. And then there's also like there's also something to carry forward in terms of audience accessibility, right? Like you're doing this whole series of new play workshops and it's being streamed, right? Which is like more nights than I know most people can make it to the theater, right? In a span of a month. So they can actually like watch a fuller process, including more things without needing to go out every week, right?
Yeah.
If you want to. I don't know.
And also it's more accessible. So if you really wanted to catch something in a completely different place, maybe you were on a vacation once and saw a show somewhere and you would love to get back there, but it's in San Diego or wherever it is. You can always check out what they're doing. So, So let's go back to casting. I know we digressed. I'm very good at that. So in the process of not of a specific workshop, but of the build up to a workshop, what are some of the conversations, and I'm going off script, I know you're looking at your questions that I sent you and you're like, wait a minute, what's he asking? What are some of the conversations you have as a casting director with the director of a workshop, with the artistic director or the production manager or something going into like the prep, going into a workshop?
Yeah, I mean, I think what changes honestly the most for me as a casting director is the conversation differs between like if we were having auditions or not, right? Which is what I think the biggest difference is for me is if especially if they don't know the pool they're working with and it's really like I'm telling them who seems like the right people and they're going off of like a headshot and resume, right? That's really different. And it requires a lot more specificity, I think, on the director's part, and a lot more interrogation on my part to really make sure we're on the exact same page and that I know exactly what they're looking for, what are the qualities of the character, like what are they envisioning in the world and the ensemble working together, in a way that I think sometimes in full productions, we actually learn a lot of that in casting. Right. So when you're going through the casting process, there's sometimes I'll bring in people that are vastly different ages or different, right? Because we just don't know yet. And then we'll see who reads well together. And you just can't really do that as much if you're casting like a one-off workshop that you're not having auditions for. Yeah. I think that's probably the biggest difference for me.
Cool. I realized that at the very beginning of this, I didn't actually say out loud. So if anybody who's watching, if you have any questions for myself or Jenna Duncan pertaining to casting and or the Forward New Work series, please feel free to leave them in the comments. We have a couple more things to go through, so I'll be reading them as we go. But yeah, forgot to say that. Anyway, so as far as that question of that you were talking about, that question of whether or not you're auditioning. What about, so I will be transparent as far as the first 2 of our workshops that we've done for Forward so far, we didn't audition. It was based off of our casting director, Noah Schaefer, him knowing certain people in town and our knowledge of the play, along with the knowledge of the director of just different people who we thought would be good for roles. Mm-hmm. Where's my question there? Versus that, having the time to be able to take the time to look for stuff, specifically if you don't know what it is you're looking for because it's going into workshop, or if you don't necessarily know your pool in the area. Is either route there better than the other if you have the ability to still cast a workshop, I guess?
It's a really good question. I mean, honestly, the other solution that I use for this sometimes, which of course now we're doing a lot more of, is video auditions. If I'm like, hey, I really don't want to drag people out to Olney to audition for something wherever, to audition for something, or skip work to audition for something that's going to pay $50, right? I mean, or hopefully it pays more than that, but who knows? So sometimes I'll say like, hey, I don't usually audition for things like this, but the director doesn't know anybody. We're really eager to see a pool of people. Do you mind just sending me like a 30-second video, 30-minute video? Oh my God.
And the first act of your favorite play.
Oh my God. Yeah, I use that sometimes, and that usually gets a decent response of, I think people, it did pre-pandemic. I'm not actually sure where we're landing right now on like, I think video auditions used to be a little more, at least from my perspective, like, it's okay, you can just throw this on tape and like, we're not taking it that seriously. And now I think since it's the only way, I see people are doing like really intense things with their video auditions. So that's probably changing too. Everything's changing. But where was I going with that? But yes, so that's a solution sometimes to figuring out like which is better. I think for getting new people in and for the director expanding their pool of who they have to use, then auditioning is great. I guess for me, where I feel like you asked before about like how my job changes. I think the other thing is like the parts of my job that actually are list building, which is like things like me going to open calls and me making sure that I'm seeing as much theater in the area as possible, and that I'm seeing graduating classes from schools, and that like just the knowledge of the part of my job that is knowing the pool becomes a lot more important when there's not a casting call, right? When there's just me making a list for a director. So maybe that's actually the answer to your question of like, that's the biggest part of my job that really changes, is that's the time where like all of the sort of research, if you will, of being a casting director, I think really kicks in.
Can I ask, and you can choose not to answer, what's that part of your job look like now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing as much online theater as I can, which is depressing. And to be totally honest with you, and I feel like I shouldn't say this but like, whatever. I just don't know that it's officially going to happen or anything, but I am really looking at how to do like an extended sort of open call, whether that's with other companies or not, but like how we can even do like, how can we totally transform the way that auditions work? Can we do a couple hours a day through 3 months of this, of people choosing when they get to come? I mean, I don't actually know what it looks like yet, but it is something I've made like roughly 6 versions of on my computer, and I'm hoping that I can workshop, if you will, that idea a little bit more.
I would be interested in continuing that idea and that conversation. We actually had a brief conversation here in-house about trying to figure out what the best steps forward are for new artists in town, for new performers, for new designers, new people who want to move into directing and or dramaturgy and things, that those first steps into getting the experience needed and able to be considered professional enough to get a job to do the job you'd want to do. That catch-22 is so strong and so hard to bypass.
Totally, but at least actors have virtual, right? Like
exactly.
Like I can't direct I could, but like I can't direct a full production, the level of whatever, and send it into somebody. But I could record a monologue in my spare time and send that to a casting director. Whether or not they look at it is TBD. I like to look at them. So,
and while I can't speak for every designer, speaking for myself as someone who likes to design, me putting together a design that will never be seen is so heartbreaking, like so heartbreaking. So I actually was thinking about this morning, just of all like the area designers I've had the pleasure of working with, and just being like, I want to hug you all.
And yeah, I mean, truly everybody who works in the arts right now. But I think when you talk about we talked a lot about actor collaboration throughout this, and I think actually this is a really key example of like, I'm a facilitator for actors' voices, right? But like, I am not the voice of any actors, right? Like, I'm telling you things, I'm answering on behalf of like, this is what people have told me. But like, I view my job as more of a facilitator of things that make actors able to do their best work. I can't always execute that, but that's always what I try to do. And so for something like this, like really, you and I can think of all the examples in the world, but until actors are like, this is what would help us, I feel like that's a little bit pointless.
Absolutely. So any actors that are watching, please feel free to jump in and give us some feedback. Very interesting that you consider yourself a facilitator. I consider myself the same. I really am that person that sets things up between essentially performing artists and audience members. Performing audience members, they perform. But that's how I see what I do. So it's very interesting. I guess I'm curious as to how many other different positions in the theater world they would refer to themselves or think of themselves in that light, as a facilitator of some kind.
Probably most people who build teams of some sort, hopefully, right? I mean, I don't know. Anyway.
Well, I don't want to take up all of your nights.
Sorry.
No. You're I'm looking at the clock and I went, ooh. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you being here and getting a chance to chat. And so, again, for those of us watching, Jenna Duncan. And if you are interested, please come join us next Friday evening for our public reading of American You by Terrence Patrick Hughes. You can check in on our website, www.prologuetheater.org, to reserve yourself a ticket for the virtual broadcast. It is a free event with a possible donation if you would like to. So again, Jenna, thank you so very much for your time, and I'll talk to you again soon. For everyone who joined us, thank you so much for joining us. Have a great night.